The December wind cut through downtown Chicago like a blade, sending scraps of paper dancing across the frozen sidewalks. Marcus Williams pulled his thin jacket tighter as he climbed the steps to his mother's apartment building, the familiar weight of exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders. At 28, he carried himself like a man who'd been fighting uphill battles his entire life. Shoulders perpetually tensed, jaw set in a hard line that had become his default expression over the past year. The building's lobby smelled of old carpet and industrial disinfectant, a scent that always reminded him of struggle. Marcus checked his watch, 6:47 p.m. He was running late again, thanks to his supervisor at the warehouse who'd insisted he finish loading an entire truck before clocking out. The overtime pay would help, but it meant another evening of arriving home to find his mother, Dorothy, already asleep in her chair, her medication schedule disrupted because he wasn't there to remind her. Dorothy Williams, 63 and battling diabetes, along with early-stage heart disease, had been Marcus's sole responsibility since his father walked out when Marcus was 15. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, until her health began failing 3 years ago. Now Marcus carried that burden, working 60-hour weeks at a logistics company, while trying to manage her medical appointments, medications, and the mounting stack of bills that seemed to multiply faster than he could pay them. As he fumbled for his keys outside apartment 4B, Marcus could hear the familiar sound of his mother's television through the thin door. She was probably watching her evening news program, the one that helped her feel connected to the world outside their increasingly small universe of doctor visits and grocery runs. "Mom," Marcus called as he entered, immediately noticing how cold the apartment felt. "Did you eat dinner?" Dorothy looked up from her recliner, her warm brown eyes brightening at the sight of her son. Despite everything, she maintained an optimism that Marcus found both admirable and frustrating. "I was waiting for you, baby. Thought we could order something together." Marcus felt the familiar pang of guilt. His mother shouldn't have to wait for him to eat, but he knew she cherished their shared meals as one of the few bright spots in their routine. "I'm sorry I'm late. Let me see what we have in the fridge first." The refrigerator told the story of their financial situation in stark detail. A carton of eggs with 3 left, some leftover rice from 2 days ago, and a half-empty gallon of milk that would need to last until his next paycheck. Marcus closed the door and rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of one of his stress headaches. "You know what?" he said, forcing a smile for his mother's sake. "Let's order from that Chinese place you like, the one with the sweet and sour chicken." Dorothy's face lit up. "Are you sure, Marcus? I know money's tight right now." He was already pulling out his phone, calculating how much he could afford, while still having enough for his mother's medication refill tomorrow. "It's Friday night. We deserve something good." 25 minutes later, Marcus found himself pacing the narrow hallway between their kitchen and living room, checking his phone every 30 seconds. The delivery app had estimated 20 to 25 minutes, and they were now approaching the 40-minute mark. His mother had taken her evening medication on schedule, which meant she needed to eat soon to avoid nausea. "They said 25 minutes, Mom. It's been almost 40. Dorothy waved a dismissive hand. "Traffic's probably bad with all this snow, honey. Don't worry about it." But Marcus was worrying. His mother's blood sugar levels required consistent meal timing, and delays like this could throw off her entire schedule. He'd already called the restaurant once, only to be told the driver was on his way. The frustration that had been building all day, from his supervisor's unreasonable demands to the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, began to crystallize into something harder and more focused. When the doorbell finally rang at 7:52 p.m., Marcus was ready for a fight. He yanked the door open to find a tall man in his 50s standing in the hallway, holding their order in insulated bags. The delivery man was impeccably dressed despite the weather, expensive-looking coat, leather gloves, and shoes that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and even in the building's harsh fluorescent lighting, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that spoke of a life lived without financial worry. "Marcus Williams?" the man asked politely, consulting a receipt. "You're over an hour late," Marcus snapped, his voice echoing in the narrow hallway. "Do you have any idea what kind of inconvenience this causes? My mother has medical conditions that require her to eat on schedule, and your incompetence just completely screwed up her evening routine." The delivery man's expression remained calm, but Marcus caught something flicker across his features, surprise perhaps or concern. "I apologize for the delay. Traffic was traffic," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. Don't give me some generic excuse. This is ridiculous. People depend on services being provided as promised. My mother's been waiting to eat for over an hour because you couldn't do your job properly. Marcus, Dorothy's voice called from the living room, gentle but concerned. Is everything all right? The delivery man glanced toward the sound of her voice, then back at Marcus. Sir, I understand your frustration. If there's anything I can do to... What you can do is be on time next time. Marcus cut him off, snatching the bags from the man's hands. Or better yet, find a job you're actually capable of handling. Some of us have real responsibilities. For a moment, the hallway fell silent except for the building's old heating system rattling somewhere in the walls. The delivery man studied Marcus's face with an intensity that felt almost uncomfortable, as if he were memorizing every detail. I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience, the man said finally, his voice quieter now. I hope your mother enjoys her meal. There was something in the way he said your mother that gave Marcus pause, but his anger was still running too hot for reflection. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, less than he'd normally tip, but his patience was exhausted, along with his generosity. The delivery man looked at the money for a long moment, then gently pushed Marcus's hand back. That's not necessary. Have a good evening. As Marcus watched the man walk down the hallway toward the elevator, something nagged at him. The way the stranger had handled his outburst with such composure, the expensive clothes, the refusal of the tip, it didn't add up to a typical food delivery driver. But his mother was calling his name again, and the smell of sweet and sour chicken was making his stomach growl. Coming, Mom, he called, closing the door and carrying their dinner to the small dining table they'd inherited from his grandmother. As they ate, Dorothy chatted about her day, a phone call from her sister in Milwaukee, a funny story from one of her medical shows. Marcus tried to engage, but his mind kept drifting back to the encounter in the hallway. Something about the delivery man's reaction bothered him, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. You seem distracted, baby, Dorothy observed, reaching across the table to pat his hand. Everything okay? Marcus forced himself to focus on his mother's kind face, lined with years of worry and struggle, but still radiating warmth. Just tired. Long day at work. You work too hard, she said, the same gentle criticism she'd been offering for months. You need to take care of yourself too, you know. Looking at her now, noting how thin she'd gotten despite her appetite, how the circles under her eyes seemed to darken each week, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, more bills, more worry about her health and their future. He had no way of knowing that the man he'd just berated in their hallway would change everything about their lives. No way of knowing that his moment of anger had just intersected with a story much larger than their small apartment and daily struggles. For now there was just dinner with his mother, the sound of snow beginning to fall against their windows, and the comfortable routine of two people taking care of each other in a world that often felt indifferent to their efforts. Saturday morning arrived gray and bitter, with temperatures that made Chicago feel more like the Arctic tundra. Marcus had been up since 5:30 a.m., unable to sleep after another night of worrying about the stack of medical bills on the kitchen counter. The latest statement from Northwestern Memorial Hospital showed a balance that made his stomach turn. $3,947 for his mother's emergency room visit last month, when her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high. He sat at their small kitchen table, laptop open to his online banking, watching the numbers that never seemed to add up. After rent, utilities, groceries, and his mother's medications, there was barely enough left over for bus fare to work, let alone emergency medical expenses. The hospital's financial aid application sat half-completed beside his coffee mug, another reminder of how precarious their situation had become. "Morning, baby," Dorothy's voice came from the hallway as she shuffled toward the kitchen in her worn slippers. Even first thing in the morning, she managed a smile for her son, though Marcus could see the fatigue in her movements. "Morning, Mom. How'd you sleep?" "Oh, you know, these old bones don't like the cold much." She settled into her chair with a soft grunt, immediately reaching for the pill organizer Marcus had filled the night before. "What's got you up so early? It's Saturday." Marcus closed the laptop, not wanting her to see the financial statements. "Just couldn't sleep, thought I might take a walk, get some fresh air." Dorothy gave him that knowing look mothers perfect over decades of reading their children. "Marcus, honey, I know when you're worrying. Is it the bills again?" Before he could answer, Dorothy's phone rang from the living room. She started to get up, but Marcus waved her back down. "I'll get it." The caller ID showed Northwestern Memorial, and Marcus's heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. Hospital calls on Saturday mornings were rarely good news. Hello? Good morning. Is this the Williams residence? The voice was professional, female, probably mid-30s. Yes, this is Marcus Williams. Mr. Williams, this is Jennifer Chen from the Financial Services Department at Northwestern Memorial. I'm calling regarding your mother Dorothy's account. Marcus braced himself for another demand for payment, another threat to send the account to collections. Look, I know we're behind on the payments, but I'm working on the financial aid application. Actually, Mr. Williams, I'm calling with some unusual news. Your mother's account has been paid in full. The words didn't register immediately. Marcus stood frozen in the living room, phone pressed to his ear. I'm sorry, what? The balance on Mrs. Williams' account, the full $3,147 was paid yesterday evening. The payment came through as an anonymous donation to our hospital's charity care fund, specifically designated for your mother's care. Marcus sank onto the couch, his mind racing. Anonymous? That doesn't make sense. Who would? The donor requested complete anonymity. All I can tell you is that the payment was made in cash, and there's a note in the file that says, "For Dorothy Williams, from someone who believes in taking care of family." After hanging up, Marcus sat staring at the phone for several minutes. Anonymous donations didn't just happen, especially not for the exact amount of someone's medical debt. Someone specific had to have known about their situation, but who? The few friends he had from high school had their own struggles. His mother's sister in Milwaukee was living on Social Security. There was no one in their lives with that kind of money. Marcus? Dorothy appeared in the doorway, concern written across her face. Who was that, honey? The hospital mom. He looked up at her, still processing the impossibility of what he'd just heard. Someone paid your medical bills, all of them. Dorothy's hand flew to her chest. What? Who would do such a thing? They don't know. It was anonymous. For the next hour, they sat together trying to make sense of it. Dorothy insisted it must be some kind of mistake, that the hospital had mixed up accounts. Marcus called back twice to confirm, each time receiving the same information. The payment was real, it was designated specifically for Dorothy Williams, and the donor had requested complete privacy. By noon, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do something, anything, to understand what had happened. He decided to walk to the Chinese restaurant where they'd ordered from the night before, though he wasn't sure what he hoped to accomplish. Golden Dragon Restaurant occupied a narrow storefront on Clark Street, squeezed between a laundromat and a cell phone repair shop. The owner, Mrs. Chen, no relation to the hospital's Jennifer Chen, had been running the place for 15 years and knew most of her regular customers by name and order preferences. "Marcus," she called from behind the counter when he entered. "You want the usual for you and your mama?" "Actually, Mrs. Chen, I wanted to ask you about the delivery driver from last night, the one who brought our order." Her expression grew puzzled. "What delivery driver?" "Tommy called in sick yesterday. I delivered your order myself." Marcus felt the ground shift under his feet. "No, it was a man. Older, silver hair, really well dressed. Definitely not you." Mrs. Chen shook her head definitively. "Marcus, honey, I've been here all day yesterday. Tommy's been sick all week. I delivered everything myself, and I definitely didn't deliver to your address last night." The walk home felt surreal, as if Marcus were moving through someone else's life. If Mrs. Chen hadn't delivered their food and Tommy was sick, then who was the man in the expensive coat? And how had he known their order, their address, even their names? Back in the apartment, Marcus found his mother reading in her chair, but she looked up expectantly when he entered. "Any luck finding out about our mysterious benefactor?" Marcus sat down heavily on the couch. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully. The man who delivered our food last night, have you ever seen him before?" Dorothy set down her book, giving his question serious consideration. "No, baby, I didn't even see him. Why?" "Because Mrs. Chen says she didn't send anyone to our apartment last night. She says she was making all the deliveries herself." The color drained from Dorothy's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone pretended to be a delivery driver, brought us food we'd ordered, and today our medical bills get paid by an anonymous donor." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of the impossible sequence of events. Someone who knew exactly what we'd ordered, knew our address, knew our names. They sat in silence for several minutes, the implications settling over them like a heavy blanket. Someone had been watching them, knew about their struggles, had enough money to pay thousands of dollars in medical bills without blinking. "Marcus," Dorothy said quietly, "what exactly did you say to him?" The memory came flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. His anger, his harsh words about incompetence and finding a job he could handle, the way the man had listened without defending himself, how he'd looked toward Dorothy's voice with what Marcus now realized might have been recognition, not curiosity. I yelled at him, "Mum, I was horrible. I told him he was incompetent, that he should find a job he could actually do." Marcus felt sick remembering his own words. "And then today he pays our bills." Dorothy reached for his hand. "Oh, baby, what kind of person does that? Takes abuse from a stranger and then helps them?" "Someone with a very big heart," Dorothy said softly, "and someone who understands what it's like to worry about family." As evening fell, Marcus stood at their apartment window looking down at the street, wondering if the mysterious man was somewhere out there. The questions multiplied with each passing hour. Who was he? Why had he chosen to help them? And most importantly, how could Marcus ever apologize for his behavior to someone whose identity remained completely unknown? The snow had started falling again, covering Chicago in a fresh layer of white that made everything look clean and new. But Marcus felt the weight of his actions from the night before, knowing that somewhere in the city was someone who had shown incredible kindness in response to his anger. Tomorrow would bring new questions, and the beginning of a search that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about generosity, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways people's lives could intersect. The following Monday morning found Marcus distracted at work, his mind replaying the weekend's revelations, while his hands mechanically sorted packages in the warehouse. Every few minutes he'd catch himself staring into space, thinking about silver hair and expensive coats, about anonymous donations and impossible coincidences. "Williams!" His supervisor Tony's voice cut through his thoughts like a buzzsaw. "You've been scanning the same package for 5 minutes. What's wrong with you today?" "Sorry, Tony. Just tired." Tony studied him with the practiced eye of a man who'd managed warehouse workers for 20 years. "Look, I know you got a lot on your plate with your mom and all, but I need you focused here. We got district managers coming through this week." Marcus nodded and forced himself to concentrate on the conveyor belt moving steadily past his station. But even as he worked, part of his mind was planning. During his lunch break, he intended to do something that felt simultaneously necessary and completely insane. He was going to try to find the mysterious man who'd changed their lives. At noon, Marcus sat in his car outside the warehouse, eating a peanut butter sandwich while scrolling through his phone. He'd started with Google searches about recent anonymous donations in Chicago, but the results were overwhelmingly generic. Charity websites and news articles about philanthropists who weren't anonymous at all. Then he tried a different approach: Northwestern Memorial Hospital's board of directors. If someone had that kind of money to throw around casually, maybe they had connections to the hospital. The hospital's website listed 15 board members, complete with photos and brief biographies. Marcus studied each face carefully, but none matched the man from Friday night. His phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "Feeling much better today. Made soup for dinner. Love you." The simple message reminded him why he was doing this. His mother deserved to know who had helped them, and Marcus needed to apologize for his inexcusable behavior. But more than that, something about the entire situation felt unfinished, like a story missing its final chapter. That evening, Marcus decided to take a more direct approach. He walked the 6 blocks from their apartment to Golden Dragon restaurant, arriving just as Mrs. Chen was preparing to close. "Marcus, you want dinner to go?" "Actually, Mrs. Chen, I wanted to ask you more about Friday night. You said you made all the deliveries yourself?" She nodded, wiping down the counter. "Every single one. Why you keep asking about this? Can you remember what deliveries you made that evening? Maybe around 7 or 8 o'clock?" Mrs. Chen paused in her cleaning, thinking. "Friday was busy. I made maybe 15, 20 deliveries, most to the apartments on North Side. Why is this so important?" Marcus hesitated, then decided honesty might get him further than mystery. "Someone came to our apartment pretending to be a delivery driver from your restaurant. The next day, someone paid my mother's hospital bills anonymously. I think it was the same person." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. "Someone pretended to be from my restaurant. He had our exact order, knew our address, even had the receipt, but you're saying you never sent anyone to our building?" "Never." Mrs. Chen set down her cleaning supplies, giving Marcus her full attention. "You know what? I remember Friday night now. I had one order I couldn't deliver." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "Around 6:30, man comes in, very well dressed. He pays cash for an order. Sweet and sour chicken, fried rice, spring rolls. But then he asks for the receipt and says he'll deliver it himself. Said it was for a friend." The pieces clicked into place with stunning clarity. Did you see what he looked like? Silver hair, expensive coat, very polite, very generous tip. I thought it was strange, but the money was good, so Mrs. Chen shrugged apologetically. Marcus felt a mixture of amazement and growing guilt. The man had deliberately sought out their order, paid for it himself, and then delivered it personally, all so he could check on them somehow. And Marcus had screamed at him for being late. Mrs. Chen, did he give you a name? Anything that might help me find him? She shook her head. He paid cash, didn't want receipt, but Marcus, why would someone do this? This is very strange behavior. Walking home, Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. The man clearly had money, but why would a wealthy stranger care about their family's problems? And how had he even known they existed? Back at the apartment, Marcus found Dorothy watching the evening news in her recliner. She looked up as he entered, immediately reading the expression on his face. You found something. Marcus sat down and told her about his conversation with Mrs. Chen. As he spoke, Dorothy's eyes grew wider and more concerned. Marcus, this person went to a lot of trouble to help us, but it also means he was watching us somehow, knew about our situation before Friday night. The thought had been bothering Marcus all day. Mom, I need to ask you something. Is there anyone from your past, maybe someone you knew years ago who might have come into money? Dorothy considered this carefully. Baby, you know our life. We've never moved in circles with that kind of wealth. The people I know are working folks like us. What about when you were younger, before Dad left? A shadow crossed Dorothy's face at the mention of Marcus's father. Your daddy and I, we didn't know many people with money. That was part of our problem. He always thought he deserved better than what he had. They sat in contemplative silence for a while, the television news providing background noise. Then Dorothy spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You know, there is one thing that's been nagging at me since you told me about the hospital payment. Marcus looked up. What? The note the hospital mentioned, from someone who believes in taking care of family. That's a very specific way to phrase it. What do you mean? Dorothy leaned forward in her chair. When you were little, maybe 8 or 9, you used to ask me why your daddy left. And I would tell you that some people understand that family comes first, and some people don't. I used to say that the people who matter are the ones who believe in taking care of family. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. You think this person knows you? Personally? I don't know, baby. But that phrase, those exact words, it's not how most people would express that sentiment. Marcus felt as if he was standing on the edge of a revelation that would redefine everything he thought he knew about their lives. Someone out there not only knew them personally enough to reference his mother's specific words, but cared enough to intervene in their struggles with extraordinary generosity. Mom, I need to ask you to think harder. Anyone from work, from the neighborhood, from church, anyone who might have known us well enough to remember conversations like that. Dorothy closed her eyes, clearly searching through decades of memories. When she opened them again, there was something new in her expression. Not recognition exactly, but a troubling possibility. Marcus, there is one person, but it's impossible. It can't be him. Who? Dorothy's voice was barely above a whisper. Your father had a brother, Richard. We lost touch after the divorce, but he always said family should take care of each other. But baby, Richard was broke when I knew him. Worked odd jobs, could barely keep a roof over his own head. Marcus felt the room spin slightly. Uncle Richard? I barely remember him. He loved you, though. Used to bring you little gifts when he could afford them. Said you deserved better than what your father was providing. Dorothy's voice grew sad. But Marcus, even if it was Richard, even if he somehow came into money, how would he have found us, and why now? Outside, the Chicago wind howled around their building, carrying with it the promise of another bitter night. But inside their small apartment, Marcus felt the warmth of a mystery that was finally beginning to make sense, and the growing weight of understanding just how badly he had misjudged someone who might be family. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected snowfall that blanketed Chicago in pristine white, transforming the city's harsh edges into something softer and more forgiving. Marcus had barely slept, his mind churning with questions about Uncle Richard and the growing certainty that their mysterious benefactor was someone from their family's fractured past. Dorothy was already awake when he emerged from his bedroom, sitting at the kitchen table with a shoebox he'd never seen before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she'd had as restless a night as he had. Mom? What's that? Old photos, she said softly, gesturing to the box. I stayed up looking through them, trying to remember Richard better. I found some pictures of you with him when you were little. Marcus sat beside her as she pulled out a faded photograph. In it, a young Marcus, maybe 7 years old, sat on the shoulders of a man with dark hair and kind eyes. The man was laughing, and even at that age, Marcus looked completely at ease with him. "That's Richard," Dorothy said. "Your father's younger brother. He was always good with you, always made time, even when he was struggling." More photos followed. Richard helping young Marcus build a snowman. Richard at Marcus's 8th birthday party, with a wrapped gift that probably represented a significant portion of his income. Richard and Dorothy talking seriously, while Marcus played in the background. "He looks different than I remember," Marcus said, studying his uncle's face. "Thinner then, and his hair was dark. But look at his eyes, Marcus. Look at how he's looking at you in these pictures." The love was unmistakable. Even in faded photographs, Richard's devotion to his young nephew was evident in every image. Marcus felt a painful tug of memory, vague recollections of someone who always seemed to have time for him, who listened when he talked, who made him feel important. What happened to him after Dad left? Dorothy sighed, carefully placing the photos back in the box. "Richard tried to keep in touch for a while, but your father made it clear he didn't want his family involved in our lives anymore. Richard respected that, even though I could tell it broke his heart to lose contact with you. Do you know what happened to him, where he went?" "Last I heard, about 15 years ago, he'd moved to California. Someone told me he was working in technology, but I never knew if that was true." The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Technology in California could explain wealth accumulation over 15 years. The timing matched. And the personal knowledge of their situation. The specific phrasing of the donation note. The way he'd looked toward Dorothy's voice with recognition. It all pointed to someone who had once been family. Marcus spent his lunch break researching Richard Williams in California. The search results were overwhelming. Dozens of men with that name across the state. But when he added technology to the search, one result made his breath catch. Richard Williams, founder and former CEO of Cloud Sync Solutions, had sold his company to Microsoft 3 years earlier for what tech blogs estimated at $250 million. The accompanying photo showed a distinguished man with silver hair and the same kind eyes Marcus remembered from the childhood photographs. The article mentioned that Williams had grown up in Chicago and was known for his philanthropy, particularly his support of healthcare initiatives for working families. It was him. It had to be him. That evening, Marcus showed the article to Dorothy. She stared at her former brother-in-law's photo for a long time, tears slowly gathering in her eyes. "He did well for himself," she whispered, "and he came back to check on us. Mum, I treated him terribly. I screamed at him, told him he was incompetent. I had no idea." Dorothy reached for his hand. "Honey, you didn't know. And from what I remember about Richard, he wouldn't blame you for being protective of me. But how do I apologize to someone I can't find? He went to all that trouble to help us anonymously." Dorothy was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Then she looked up with a determined expression. "Cloud Sync Solutions. If he founded it, there might still be people there who know how to reach him." The next morning, Marcus called Cloud Sync's corporate headquarters in San Francisco. After being transferred 3 times, he finally reached someone in the executive offices who confirmed that Richard Williams was indeed the company's founder, though he'd retired after the Microsoft acquisition. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Williams values his privacy very highly," the assistant explained. "We don't provide contact information for former executives." Marcus had expected this, but he'd prepared for it too. "Could you at least pass along a message? It's about family." There was a pause. "What kind of message?" "Please tell him that Marcus Williams from Chicago would like to thank him for his kindness and that Dorothy Williams would very much like to speak with him. I'll see what I can do." 2 days later, Marcus's phone rang while he was at work. The caller ID showed a California area code. "Marcus?" The voice was warm, slightly hesitant, but unmistakably familiar despite the years. "Uncle Richard?" "Hello, nephew." There was a wealth of emotion packed into those 2 words. "I got your message." Marcus stepped outside into the warehouse parking lot, needing privacy for this conversation. "Uncle Richard, I owe you an enormous apology. Friday night, when you brought the food, I was horrible to you. I had no idea." "Marcus, stop." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "You were protecting your mother. You were being a good son. I couldn't have been more proud of you." Tears Marcus didn't expect began flowing down his cheeks. "But I screamed at you. I was so rude." "You were worried about Dorothy's health and frustrated by what you thought was poor service. Any good man would have reacted the same way." "How did you find us? How did you know we needed help?" Richard's sigh carried clearly across the phone line. "I never stopped wondering about you, Marcus. After I started making money, I hired investigators to find you both. I've been watching from a distance for 3 years, making sure you were okay. When I saw the hospital bills piling up, I knew I had to do something. Why didn't you just contact us directly? Because your father made it very clear when he left that the Williams family wasn't welcome in your lives anymore. I didn't know if that extended to Dorothy's feelings too. I thought if I could help anonymously, it would be better than risking rejection. Marcus thought about all the times over the years when they'd struggled, when an extra $1,000 would have changed everything, when his mother had foregone medications to pay rent. You could have helped earlier. Why now? Because 3 years ago when I first found you, you were managing. Struggling, but managing. It wasn't until I saw those emergency room charges that I realized how close you were to losing everything. Richard's voice grew thick with emotion. I couldn't let my nephew and the woman who raised him suffer when I had the means to help. That evening, Marcus sat with Dorothy as she spoke to Richard on speakerphone. The conversation was tentative at first, filled with apologies and explanations, but gradually warmed into something approaching the relationship they'd once shared. Richard, Dorothy said finally, would you like to come for dinner this weekend? I think it's time this family stopped being broken. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Marcus worried they'd lost the connection. Then Richard's voice returned, thick with unshed tears. Dorothy, I would be honored, but only if you let me bring the food this time. I promise to be on time. As they made plans for Saturday dinner, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The anger and stress that had defined his life for so long began to loosen its grip. His mother would have the medical care she needed. The bills that had kept him awake at night were gone. But more than that, they had family again. Someone who understood what it meant to take care of each other. Saturday arrived clear and cold, with the kind of brilliant winter sunlight that made Chicago look almost magical. When the doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, Marcus opened the door to find Uncle Richard standing in the hallway, holding bags from Golden Dragon restaurant and wearing a tentative smile. I brought sweet and sour chicken, Richard said. And this time I really am the delivery guy. For the first time in years, Marcus felt his face break into a genuine laugh. Come in, Uncle Richard. Mom's been cooking all day, worried the rice wouldn't be perfect. As they sat around the small dining table, 3 generations of the Williams family reunited over Chinese takeout and Dorothy's homemade rice, Marcus marveled at how dramatically life could change. A week ago, they'd been alone, struggling, facing an uncertain future. Tonight, they were family again, connected by love, forgiveness, and the understanding that sometimes the most important deliveries in life arrive exactly when they're needed most, even if they're a little late. 6 months later, the first warm day of spring found Marcus walking through Lincoln Park with a lightness in his step that would have been unimaginable the previous winter. The Chicago sun felt different on his face now, not just warmer, but somehow more welcoming, as if the city itself had become a friendlier place. He was heading to meet Richard at their favorite coffee shop, a weekly tradition that had developed naturally over the months since their reunion. These Saturday morning conversations had become an anchor point in Marcus's week, a time to share updates, seek advice, and simply enjoy the company of family. The coffee shop, a cozy place called Brew and Bean, occupied a corner spot with large windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Marcus spotted Richard immediately. His uncle had claimed the same corner table they always shared, 2 steaming cups already waiting. "You're early," Marcus said, sliding into the chair across from his uncle. "Old habits," Richard smiled, gesturing to the coffee. "I got you the usual. How was your week?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee, savoring both the warmth and the routine. "Good. Really good, actually. I wanted to tell you I got the promotion." Richard's face lit up with genuine pride. "Shift supervisor? Marcus? That's fantastic." The promotion at the logistics company had been months in the making. With the financial pressure off due to Richard's help, Marcus had been able to focus better at work, take on additional responsibilities, and demonstrate the leadership skills that had always been there, but had been buried under stress and exhaustion. 20% raise, Marcus continued, and benefits that actually cover Mom's medications completely. "You've earned this, nephew. You've always been a hard worker, but now you can actually enjoy the fruits of your labor instead of just surviving." It was true. The past 6 months had brought changes Marcus was still adjusting to. Dorothy's health had stabilized dramatically once she could afford all her medications and regular checkups. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and she'd even started attending a senior center program twice a week, something that would have been impossible when Marcus was working overtime constantly just to pay rent. "How's Dorothy doing with her painting class?" Richard asked, as if reading his thoughts. "She loves it. You should see some of her work. She's actually quite talented. Last week she painted this incredible sunset over Lake Michigan. Says she wants to give it to you for your apartment." Richard's expression grew tender. "I'd be honored to hang Dorothy's artwork." Their relationship had deepened in ways Marcus hadn't expected. Richard wasn't trying to replace the father who had abandoned them, nor was he attempting to erase the years of separation. Instead, he'd stepped into his own unique role, part uncle, part mentor, part friend. He'd helped Marcus enroll in night classes toward a business degree, something that had been an impossible dream just months earlier. "Speaking of Mom," Marcus said, "she wanted me to invite you for dinner Sunday. She's making that pot roast you liked so much last time. I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, though maybe not delivered Chinese food this time," Marcus grinned. They both laughed at the reference to their reunion dinner. It had become a family joke, Richard's dramatic entrance back into their lives, disguised as a delivery driver. Dorothy particularly enjoyed retelling the story to her friends at the senior center, always emphasizing how Marcus had given his rich uncle a piece of his mind before they knew who he was. "Actually," Richard said, his tone shifting slightly, "there's something I wanted to discuss with you." Marcus looked up from his coffee, noting the more serious expression on his uncle's face. "Everything okay?" "More than okay. I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I wanted to run it by you." Richard leaned forward slightly. "How would you feel about working for me?" "What do you mean?" "I'm starting a new company. Not tech this time. Something focused on helping working families navigate healthcare costs and financial planning. I need someone I trust to help build it from the ground up." Marcus felt his heart rate quicken. "Uncle Richard, I don't have experience with—" "You have the most important experience there is," Richard interrupted gently. "You've lived it. You know exactly what families like yours need because you've been there. You understand the real challenges because you faced them." The offer was staggering in its implications. Not just financially, though Richard had mentioned a salary that would triple Marcus's current income, but professionally and personally. The chance to turn their struggles into something that could help other families seemed almost too good to be true. "I'd want to start small," Richard continued. "Maybe a pilot program here in Chicago, working with hospitals and community organizations. You'd be learning as we go, but you'd also be leading the development of services that could genuinely change people's lives." Marcus thought about all the families he'd encountered in hospital waiting rooms, all the people he'd met who were fighting the same battles he and Dorothy had faced. The idea of turning their experience into something that could help others felt like finding purpose in their pain. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally, "and talk to Mom." "Of course. Take all the time you need." That evening, Marcus sat with Dorothy in their living room, the same space where they'd struggled through so many difficult conversations about bills and health concerns. But tonight, the atmosphere was entirely different. Dorothy listened intently as Marcus described Richard's offer, asking thoughtful questions about the timeline, the responsibilities, and what it would mean for their future. "What does your heart tell you?" she asked when he'd finished explaining. "That it's an incredible opportunity, but also that it's scary. What if I'm not good enough? What if I let him down?" Dorothy smiled, the same gentle expression she'd worn when he was young and worried about starting a new school or facing a difficult challenge. "Baby, do you remember what I used to tell you when your father left? About the people who matter?" Marcus nodded. "That the people who matter are the ones who believe in taking care of family. Richard believes in you. More than that, he's seen you take care of family under the most difficult circumstances. He knows exactly what kind of man you are." She reached for his hand. "The question isn't whether you're good enough for this opportunity. The question is whether this opportunity is good enough for you." 2 weeks later, Marcus submitted his notice at the logistics company. His supervisor, Tony, was sorry to see him go, but not surprised. He'd watched Marcus transform over the past months from a stressed, overworked employee into someone with confidence and direction. On his last day, Marcus stood in the warehouse looking around at the familiar conveyor belts and sorting stations. This place had been his lifeline when he and Dorothy needed it most, providing just enough income to keep them afloat. But it had also been a limitation, a ceiling that kept them stuck in survival mode. Now, as he walked out into the Chicago afternoon, Marcus felt the weight of possibility rather than obligation. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, working alongside his uncle to build something meaningful, using their family's story of struggle and reunion to help other families find their own paths forward. The evening news was on when Marcus arrived home, and Dorothy was in her usual chair, but she looked up with excited eyes as he entered. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Your last day?" "Like an ending and a beginning at the same time," Marcus said, settling onto the couch. "I keep thinking about that night when Uncle Richard delivered our food. If someone had told me then that he'd change our entire lives, I never would have believed it." "Sometimes," Dorothy said thoughtfully, "the most important deliveries come when we least expect them. And sometimes the people who help us the most are the ones we've forgotten we needed." Outside their apartment, Chicago hummed with its usual evening energy, traffic and conversations, sirens and music, the endless symphony of urban life. But inside their small space, Marcus and Dorothy sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a family rebuilt and a future full of promise. The delivery that had started with anger and ended with love had taught them both that life's most precious gifts often arrive disguised as ordinary moments, carried by people who understand that taking care of family, however it's defined, is the most important delivery of all.